Last Sunday's weekly webinar, it was called The State of Play. And basically, it was my overview of the state of international relations and the geopolitical situation. And that webinar was, in a very real sense, a prelude to this video that I'm deliberately putting on Patreon. Because I'm going to be discussing what I think is the coming war with China and the reasons for it. And I realize that the reasons that I'm going to propose would probably get me into trouble on YouTube. I mean, on YouTube, on social media, they are banning people for telling the truth, for telling things that are objectively true or likely to be true or likely to happen, okay? And so I'm doing it on Patreon so I don't get into any trouble on the free channel. So what's very obvious is that China has been growing over the last, 35, 40 years. It's been growing by leaps and bounds. In terms of purchasing power parity, the Chinese economy has surpassed the American economy. It surpassed it a couple of years ago, as a matter of fact. And in terms of nominal terms, the Chinese economy will surpass the American economy in the next 3 to 6 years. Doesn't really matter. It's on the way. It's happening. The Chinese economy is going to be bigger, and eventually the Chinese per capita income will be matching the American per capita income. And because of a function of population size, China will dwarf America. Yeah. Now, that particular scenario is not going to happen for several decades, quite frankly. I mean, it's going to take a while for the per capita income of China to catch up to the American per capita income, but it's in the post. It's going to happen, okay? So we can just pause it and say, oh, yeah, that'll happen in 2040 or 2050, but the point that matters is that the Chinese economy is going to be bigger than the American economy in the next 5 years. And the Chinese military is growing by leaps and bounds. And more to the point, the United States recognizes that its dominant position is falling apart. And this is leading to, well, it's going to lead to crisis. You see, the last great empire that fell apart was the British Empire. And the way that the British Empire fell apart was very tidy, for lack of a better word, okay? Because most other empires, when they go down the tubes, it's like with a big, all kinds of chaos on the way down. As they circle the drain and get flushed out of history and become just another little country, right? In that circling of the drain, there's all kinds of chaos, all kinds of drama. Lots of times there are wars, right? But we have not had that experience because the British Empire, which was the dominant global empire in the year 1900, well, by 1956, it was gone. In just a few decades, this enormous empire, which arguably you could say started with Elizabeth I in 1600, roughly, it lasted the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, 3.5 centuries. And by 1956 and the Suez Canal crisis, that was it. It was done. The Suez crisis is famous because all of a sudden the British, as a people and as a government, realized we're not an empire anymore. We're a shitty little country now. Yeah. But see, there was no apocalypse insofar as Great Britain was concerned. Well, apart from World War II, of course. I'm being facetious, of course, but the point remains. See, the British, they spent their empire on the First and Second World Wars. And it's irrelevant at this point to argue whether it was a smart thing to do or a stupid thing to do. Patrick Buchanan did a very, very good book called The Unnecessary War, which I suggest you read it. But the point remains. The British exited the global stage and they were replaced at the top by the United States. And the United States, since 1945, has provided global security. Now, this actually matters because, see, in the past, each country individually provided global security. And each country had its own patch of land. But the United States, in its fight against the Soviet Union, created the conditions of this global security. And the United States underwrote it by way of its own military. It had this military in order to secure global trade, and it worked like a charm. But now the United States is overextended. The American economy is crashing because not just of COVID, but a whole host of other issues that have been going on for decades at this point. Principally, the deindustrialization of the country and the fragility of the remaining economy. And things are going very badly for the United States. And the whole COVID thing has exacerbated a lot of problems, income inequality and whatnot. And so America is going down the tubes, and there is a segment of the American leadership class that cannot stand this. They cannot accept it. They don't want to accept it, and they want to fight it. And they have lit on the idea that a war with China would be the way to halt this decline. A man I despise is Paul Krugman. I've actually had some run-ins with the man. Back in the day, back in like 2010, 2011, I thought that he was a fucking warmonger and said so. And I got some shit for it, but that's not the point. The point is, see, people like Paul Krugman, they are of the mistaken notion that World War II got the United States out of the Great Depression, and so maybe a nice little war would do the same for the American economy now. If the economy of the United States is in bad shape, then maybe a good old-fashioned war would fix things. That's the rationale, which is fucking insane. But a lot of people think so. A lot of people, it's not that they're blinded by history, see? They are misreading history. They're not understanding the lessons of World War II. And they think that the industrial production of World War II set up the conditions for American dominance, which is true. But the thing is, see, the United States at that time, the kind of war that was being fought was a slow-boiling mechanized war. It had the time to do that, to build its industrial base. But today, the United States does not have that industrial base. Any kind of war that happens today is light years faster, okay? Faster paced, higher combat tempo. See, a war today would have no influence on the American economy, because in modern warfare, what people call now fourth generation warfare, well, the warfare of today, especially the high-end warfare, would be so fast, it would be over in 30 days, 90 days on the outside. I mean, people aren't going to be digging trenches and fighting there, you know, with a no man's land in front of them. It doesn't work that way anymore, okay? It's all missiles, it's all drones, it's all high speed, high tempo, 24/7 combat. And that kind of high tempo combat, well, it chews up an army and it's done one way or the other in short order. But these people, these economists who think that, well, who think that a war would be good for the American economy, they don't understand the realities of modern warfare. They're just sort of like blinded by the glory days of World War II, and they want to repeat those glory days. And that's why they think that a war would be good. There's another group of people in the American leadership class, which are the neocons, basically, who want to control the world. Their arrogance, their psychosis, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. They have this need to dominate the world. They cannot stomach the fact that the United States is not the top dog, not in control of everything. And they're going to want a war. And they are going to be very vocal. And right now you see it, how they are lining up and aiming at China. China is the enemy. China is the power that's trying to hurt us. And you're going to see in short order how they're going to blame the pandemic and the overreaction to the pandemic on China. I mean, come on, why do you think that all of a sudden they're saying that the COVID-19 virus, or the virus that causes COVID-19, emerged from a Chinese laboratory? For a year, they were saying that that speculation was conspiracy theory nonsense bullshit, right? And now they're saying that, oh yeah, it probably did come from a lab, a Chinese lab. What the fuck you think is going on? They're putting their ducks in a row so that they can blame China for the overreaction to COVID-19, because that's what it was. It was the American political establishment that completely overreacted. And I'm not going to exempt myself. You guys remember when this shit was happening, I was like, holy fucking shit, this could be like a fucking airborne Ebola that could wipe us out, right? I was scared shitless at the time. But as data emerged, and by May, June at the latest, I was like, oh, this is just nothing. This is a fucking cold. It's no big deal. And I overreacted. I said so by June of 2020, right? But these fuckers kept on their lockdowns and all their insane policies all throughout 2020 and into 2021. It was their mistake, their overreaction, and their unwillingness to look at the data and see how that they had overreacted. And so this kind of responsibility, they're going to point it at China and say that China is responsible. It was the fucking Chinese. They fucked us over. And we should go to war with them. Yeah, because that's how human nature works. There are very few men in the world you'll come to find who have the balls, the courage to say, yeah, I fucked up. I was totally wrong and I'm sorry. Very few men can do that. And you come across such men, they're valuable precisely because of that, because they're willing to stand up and say, yeah, I was wrong. But in our current leadership, in the Western democracies, and especially the United States, there are no such men. They do not have the balls to stand up and say, yeah, I was wrong, we fucked up. It was on us and we made the wrong choice at the time. You see, because it's a lesson that I've learned, the hard way, of course, is that when you just stand up and say, yeah, I was wrong, I fucked up, and these were the reasons I made my decision at the time, and well, it turned out I was wrong. Most people, the vast majority of people, 99.99% of the people will forgive you. They'll be like, okay, you made a mistake, you're human, no problem, and people move on. But see, the leadership in Washington, the leadership of the United States, they don't have that mentality. And so they're going to point the finger at China and say that all the problems caused by the lockdown and the bad measures, they're going to blame it all on China. And that's why they're bringing up this Wuhan thing, to blame China. And once they've gotten everybody to see China as the enemy, they're going to launch a war. And it's going to be like a bullshit kind of war, like a false flag kind of thing. I mean, it's going to be a lie to start a war. Because, you see, there are people who think that it would be good for the American economy. There are people who, out of pride, cannot stomach the fact that America is no longer number one. And there are people who are going to use this as a way to disguise their responsibility, to say that Chinese did it. And so these three groups of people, well, unfortunately, they really do have their hands on the lever of power. And they're going to pull those levers and gear up the United States for war. And by the way, the Chinese have a sense of this, the Chinese and the Russians. Because, like I said in the webinar, those two countries are allied, intimately allied. And I discussed why in the webinar, if you're interested. But anyway, see, the Chinese, they recognize that, the United States as this burning dog, in that great metaphor, never pet a burning dog. Yeah. They realize that the United States is a burning dog. And so they understand that they should not do anything that would trigger a war with the United States. And so they're not going to, because they're smart and they're patient. They have certain strategic objectives, long-term objectives that itch at them, specifically Taiwan. Taiwan and Hong Kong. Hong Kong has been assimilated, but Taiwan, it's just an itch that they need to scratch, but they're going to control themselves. Because they know that if they were to invade Taiwan, the United States would react and would be eager to react and start a war. Because these three groups that I mentioned, they all want a war. They want a war desperately because they think that it can distract and fix all the problems in America. But a war with China will not fix any of the problems of America. It will just make them worse. And the United States, if it were to go to war with China, well, it would lose, quite simply. It would lose badly, see? Because, see, there's nothing to be gained or won by going to war with China. I mean, think of it, see? Suppose, for the sake of argument, that the Chinese decide to invade Taiwan. Okay, they invade Taiwan. What's the United States going to do? Send some carriers and get into a war, and they're going to shoot each other. And what's to be won? What, the United States is going to invade China? It's fucking insane. The United States is going to invade Taiwan and repel the Chinese invaders? It's not going to happen either. The United States could not field an army large enough to do such a thing. It would be impossible, okay? There is nothing to be won. There's no prize, except destruction. And the Chinese recognize this. And so the Chinese are going to hold off on taking Taiwan, and they're just going to play a waiting game. It's the smartest move, and those fuckers are smart. But the Americans, in their impatience, are going to do all kinds of incredibly stupid shit. And it could be that one of these stupid moves, really fucking moronic moves, might actually trigger the Chinese. I mean, I don't know what, okay? I mean, let me just caveat that before I get into this. But it could be that the Americans do something. I can't imagine what specifically, but who knows what, that the Chinese are like, no, we can't take that lying down, and we're gonna go to war with the Americans. I mean, it could be something so outrageous that the Chinese cannot say no. I don't know. I mean, it could be like trying to conquer Hong Kong. That's insane. But I don't know what it could possibly be. But it could be something so egregious, so unfathomable, that the Chinese just cannot say no, and they decide from an American provocation, yes, we're going to go to war. But even if it's a grotesque provocation on the part of the United States, I think, but I could be very wrong, that the Chinese will have the self-control to say no. Even in the face of an outrageous provocation, they'll be no. We just wait. We win by waiting. China is clearly ascendant. And I think that that's what sticks in the craw of so many American leaders, that China is so clearly ascendant, and they can't stomach it, you know? If you recall John McCain, the most awful neocon, he was a hardcore American nationalist. And for him, America was always number one. And if anybody tried to challenge that position, they had to be stomped on. That was John McCain's mentality. Don't pretend otherwise. And see, that kind of mentality, in the face of clear decay on the part of the United States and clear ascendancy on the part of China, well, it's a recipe for disaster. And there are a lot of people like John McCain in the American leadership positions who cannot accept this decline. So anyway, I'm coming to the end of this video, but you see why I can't really post it on the free channels, man? If I say any of this shit, man, they're gonna label me all kinds of nastiness, right? And I'm just looking at it pragmatically. I'm looking at it as it actually is. There are all these sectors in the American leadership class that want a war. There are all these signs that the United States is in decline and China is in ascendancy. There is the motivation to go to war pointlessly for no reason that warrants going to war other than ego and pride. If you ask me the odds, I would say at this time the odds of a war are about 40% over the next decade. I mean, 4 chances out of 10 that in the next decade there's a war between the United States and China. But you see so many little things lining up to create the conditions of a war. Now, 40% chance of war is extremely high, but it is getting higher day by day because a lot of people in positions of leadership, they want a war. That's the thing, they want it so badly. And I think that if I were to put this video up on the public channels, you know, I might get deplatformed because all this shit that I'm telling you is true. See? And that's the thing. And they don't want to face it. So many people don't want to face reality. But this is the reality that's coming at us. And it's smart of you to prepare.